The harsh fluorescent lights of the supermarket burned into my eyes as I sat on the cold, hard tile floor, my wrists bound tightly in handcuffs. A crowd had gathered, whispering and snapping pictures with their phones. Somewhere to my left, a manager was yelling at a police officer, gesturing wildly toward the aisle where I sat among spilled cereal boxes and shattered glass jars of pasta sauce. "Do you even know why you're arresting him?" the manager shouted. The officer ignored him, speaking into his radio. I blinked slowly, trying to focus. My mind was a swirling mess of confusion and disbelief. How had it come to this? Just weeks ago, I was a regular guy, a husband, a dad, someone who enjoyed a good barbecue on weekends and complained about gas prices like everyone else. Now I was here, cuffed and humiliated, with no clear idea of how it had all unraveled. But the cracks had started with something so small, so mundane, that it felt laughable now. The sleep tracker. Olivia, my wife, had bought it on a whim one weekend, insisting it would help me monitor my snoring. "It's for your health, Sam," she had said with that bright, persuasive smile that could sell ice to an Eskimo. At first, I brushed it off. Olivia was always picking up gadgets, fitness watches, air fryers, fancy blenders that cost more than a month's rent. Most of them collected dust after a week. But this time, she wouldn't let it go. "Just try it for a few nights," she urged, holding the sleek little device in her hand like it was the Holy Grail. To avoid an argument, I gave in. How bad could it be? Now, sitting on the supermarket floor, I felt a bitter laugh bubbling in my throat. That stupid little tracker. That's where it all started. The first few nights, it seemed harmless. Olivia would excitedly show me the app's graphs and recordings, pointing out how much deeper my sleep was getting. I humored her, pretending to care about the red spikes and green waves. But one morning, about 2 weeks into using it, I checked the app myself. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just curious to see what the tracker had been recording while I slept. That was when I heard it, a faint sound. I played the recording again, turning up the volume. There it was, quiet whispers, muffled laughter. Not mine, not just Olivia's. Another voice, a man's voice. My stomach dropped. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe the app had picked up some interference, like a neighbor's late-night TV show. But the laughter was unmistakable, intimate, familiar. And the worst part? It was coming from my bedroom. The sound of the officer's voice snapped me back to the present. "Let's move into the car," he said, pulling me to my feet. My legs were stiff as I stumbled forward, the crowd parting like a wave. I avoided their eyes, my cheeks burning with shame. But beneath the embarrassment, there was something else. Anger. Whatever Olivia had done, whatever had led to this moment, I was going to get to the bottom of it. The squad car's engine rumbled beneath me as I sat in the back seat, my wrists sore from the handcuffs. The officer driving hadn't said much, just the occasional muttered code into his radio. My mind, however, wouldn't stop racing. How had it all gone so wrong? The memory of that morning replayed in my mind like a broken record. The moment I first heard the recording on the sleep tracker app. It had been a regular Saturday. Olivia was already out of the house, her usual Pilates class, she'd said. The kids were at a sleepover. I had the place to myself for the first time in weeks. I'd been scrolling through my phone, killing time, when I opened the sleep tracker app. It was mostly out of boredom. The bright graphs and percentages didn't mean much to me. But then I noticed the recording section. Most of the clips were labeled snore detected or movement detected. But one caught my attention. Audio activity. 3:23 a.m. It didn't sound like snoring. I pressed play, expecting to hear the usual noises, the rustling of sheets, maybe Olivia turning over in her sleep. Instead, there were whispers, faint, hushed, as though someone was trying to stay quiet. I turned up the volume, holding the phone closer to my ear. "Don't wake him up," a man's voice said, soft but clear. Olivia giggled. My blood ran cold. The laughter in the recording was unmistakably hers. Light, airy, the same laugh I'd heard 1,000 times over our years together. The man's voice was unfamiliar, deep and casual, like he belonged there. I played the clip again. "Don't wake him up." Her response was muffled, but the giggle afterward was loud enough to make my stomach churn. I turned off the app, staring at the screen in disbelief. My brain scrambled for an explanation, some logical reason for what I'd just heard. Maybe it wasn't what it sounded like. Maybe Olivia had been watching TV, and the app picked up dialogue from a show. But I knew that wasn't true. That evening, when Olivia came home, I couldn't look her in the eye. She was all smiles as she kissed me on the cheek, breezing into the kitchen to start dinner. "Everything okay?" she asked over her shoulder, her tone light. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just tired." But I wasn't tired. I was watching. Every word she said, every movement she made seemed suspicious now. The way she checked her phone while stirring the sauce. The way she lingered in the hallway for just a moment too long before coming to the table. She wasn't acting like someone with a guilty conscience. But wasn't that the point? People who had something to hide usually worked hard to look normal. Later that night, after she fell asleep, I grabbed her phone from the nightstand. It was locked. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over it. We'd always shared everything: passwords, accounts, devices. Why did it feel like such a violation now? My mind flashed back to the recording. "Don't wake him up." I set the phone back down, my hands shaking. Now, sitting in the back of the squad car, I couldn't help but wonder. What if I'd confronted her right then? Would things have turned out differently? Or would it have pushed her deeper into whatever she was hiding? The officer pulled into the station, jolting me from my thoughts. He parked, then turned to look at me through the grates separating the front and back seats. "You'll have a chance to explain yourself inside," he said flatly. I nodded, though I wasn't sure how to explain anything. Not to him, not to myself. All I knew was that the whispers in the dark were only the beginning. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead as I sat in a cramped room, my wrists still cuffed to the metal chair. A young officer stood in the corner, tapping on his tablet and pretending not to notice my growing frustration. "You gonna tell me what this is about?" I finally asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He didn't look up. "Just wait. Someone will be in to talk to you soon." With nothing else to do, my mind wandered back to that night, the first time I confronted Olivia about the recording. I couldn't hold it in any longer. After 3 days of replaying the clip in my head, I sat her down in the living room. The kids were at school, and the house was quiet except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. "Olivia," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we talk about something?" She looked up from her laptop, her brow furrowing. "Of course. What's wrong?" I pulled out my phone and opened the sleep tracker app, navigating to the recording. "I found this," I said, placing the phone on the coffee table between us. Her eyes flicked to the screen, then back to me. "What is it?" "Just listen," I said, hitting play. The room filled with the sound of faint whispers, followed by that familiar, heart-stopping laugh. Olivia's reaction wasn't what I expected. She leaned back, crossing her arms, her face unreadable. When the recording ended, she let out a soft sigh. "Really, Sam?" she said, her tone calm but laced with irritation. "Really?" I repeated, my voice rising. "That's all you have to say? Who are you talking to?" "No one," she said with a small shrug. "The app must have picked up something random. You know how glitchy those things are." "Don't lie to me," I snapped, leaning forward. "I know your voice, Olivia, and I know what I heard." Her expression hardened. "And what exactly are you accusing me of? Talking to a ghost? Sneaking someone into our bedroom?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Sam, listen to yourself. Do you even realize how paranoid you sound?" For a moment, I faltered. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then I remembered the man's voice, the way he said, "Don't wake him up." "I'm not imagining this," I said firmly. "There's something you're not telling me." Olivia stood up, grabbing her laptop and shaking her head. "I don't have time for this, Sam. If you want to start inventing problems in our marriage, that's on you. But don't drag me into your insecurities." I watched her walk away, the pit in my stomach growing. Back in the police station, the door to the interrogation room opened, snapping me out of the memory. A man in a wrinkled suit stepped inside, carrying a folder. He set it on the table and sat across from me, his tired eyes locking onto mine. "Sam Connolly, right?" "Yeah," I muttered. "I'm Detective Hall. Want to tell me why you were causing a scene at the supermarket?" I frowned. "Causing a scene? That's not what happened." "Really?" He leaned forward, raising an eyebrow. "Because the store manager said you were shouting at a woman in the produce aisle and knocked over half the cereal display." I opened my mouth to argue, but stopped myself. Olivia's face flashed in my mind. The last time I saw her was at that supermarket. She'd been arguing with me, her voice sharp and cutting, as I tried to get answers she clearly didn't want to give. "I wasn't trying to cause a scene," I said quietly. I just wanted to talk to my wife. Hall leaned back, studying me. You've been married how long? 7 years, I said, my voice hollow. And things have been tense lately? I nodded. Why don't you start from the beginning? Hall said, motioning for me to continue. I hesitated, then took a deep breath. It all started with a sleep tracker, I said. Detective Hall listened intently as I recounted the story from the beginning. How Olivia had insisted on the sleep tracker, how I'd discovered the whispers, and the confrontation that left me questioning everything. So, you're telling me, Hall said slowly, this all started because of an app picking up some strange noises? I nodded, feeling defensive. I know how it sounds, but it wasn't just the app. She's been acting different, distant. I can't explain it, but something's going on. Hall scribbled a note in his pad, his expression unreadable. Let's say you're right. Why didn't you confront her again? Press her harder? I let out a bitter laugh. I tried. She flipped it on me, said I was paranoid, insecure, imagining things. She's good at that. Hall leaned forward. So what happened after that? After the confrontation, things between Olivia and me had shifted. She'd become more secretive, always on her phone, always finding reasons to leave the house. One night, as we were sitting in the living room, I tried to bring it up again. You've been going out a lot lately, I said casually, keeping my tone light. She didn't look up from her phone. I got a lot going on. Work, friends. You know that. Yeah, I said carefully. But it feels like you're avoiding me. Olivia sighed, setting her phone down with exaggerated patience. Sam, if you're still hung up on that stupid recording, you need to let it go. You're making this a bigger deal than it is. I'm not hung up on it. I lied. I just feel like you're hiding something. She stood up, grabbing her bag. I'm not doing this again. I'm going out for some air. I watched her leave, the door slamming behind her, and felt the anger bubbling inside me. The next morning, she was all smiles again, acting like nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman sitting across from me at breakfast wasn't the same Olivia I'd married. That's when I decided to follow her. Detective Hall's pen stopped mid-scribble. You followed her? I nodded. Yeah. She said she was meeting a friend for drinks. I didn't believe her, so I waited until she left and drove to the bar. And I hesitated, the memory still raw. She wasn't with a friend. She was sitting in a booth in the corner, with a man. Hall raised an eyebrow. Did you approach them? No, I admitted. I was too stunned. I just sat in my car and watched. After about 20 minutes, they left together, and I followed them to his car. What happened next? They didn't go anywhere, I said, my voice dropping. They just sat there talking, laughing. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I didn't need to. Hall closed his notebook, his expression thoughtful. Sounds like you've been through a lot. But this doesn't explain what happened at the supermarket. I clenched my fists. She kept pushing me, detective, kept lying, kept treating me like I was crazy. So when I saw her at the store with that guy, I lost it. I just wanted her to admit the truth. And instead, you caused a scene, Hall said flatly. I sighed, leaning back in a chair. Yeah, I guess I did. Hall stood, gathering his notes. Look, Sam, I can't promise anything. But if there's more to this, we'll figure it out. For now, sit tight. As he left the room, I stared at the empty table in front of me. Hall didn't believe me. Maybe no one would. But I wasn't crazy. I knew what I'd heard, what I'd seen, and I was going to prove it. I didn't know how long I sat in the interrogation room after Hall left, but it gave me plenty of time to think. The frustration, the confusion, it all led back to that damn sleep tracker. If I hadn't checked the recordings, none of this would have happened. But something nagged at me, the app. Olivia had been the one who insisted I use it. She'd set it up for me, walked me through the features, and acted overly enthusiastic about it. Why? I dismissed it as one of her quirky obsessions. Now, I wasn't so sure. When I got home later that evening, I felt like a stranger in my own house. The kids were still at their grandparents' place, and Olivia wasn't home. It gave me time to think and dig. I sat on the couch with my phone, opening the sleep tracker app. There had to be something I missed, some clue buried in its settings or data. As I navigated through the menus, I noticed a tab labeled Deleted Recordings. My heart jumped. I hadn't seen that before. The folder required a passcode. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Olivia had set up the app. It had to be something she'd use. I tried our wedding anniversary. Nothing. Her birth date. Still nothing. Then I remembered the password she used for most of her accounts, our dog's name, and the year we adopted him. Bingo! The folder opened, revealing a series of recordings, all marked with timestamps. They were the same nights I'd seen in the regular recordings, but longer, like the app had saved the full audio before trimming it down. I hit play on one of them, and the blood drained from my face. "He's out cold," Olivia's voice whispered. "Good," a man replied, his voice low and amused. "We got time?" There was rustling, followed by faint laughter. "Sure," Olivia said, giggling. "Don't wake him up." I paused the recording, my hands shaking. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't interference. The whispers were real, and Olivia wasn't just talking to anyone. She was talking to him. The recordings continued, each one more damning than the last. Whispered conversations, bursts of laughter, and muffled sounds I didn't want to think about. But it wasn't just the content that disturbed me. It was the consistency. Every time I'd fallen asleep wearing that tracker, they'd been there, talking, laughing, right next to me. When Olivia finally came home that night, I was waiting for her. She walked into the living room, her smile faltering when she saw me sitting on the couch with my phone in hand. "You're home late," I said, my tone flat. She hesitated. "Yeah, I had to stay back and help a friend with something." "What's with the interrogation face?" I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the app, navigating to one of the recordings. Her face paled as the sound of her own voice filled the room. "He's out cold." "Good. We got time." "What is this?" I demanded, standing up and shoving the phone toward her. Olivia's eyes darted between me and the screen, panic flashing across her face. "Sam, I can explain." "No," I snapped. "No more lies, Olivia. No more you're paranoid, or it's just interference. I know what I'm hearing. So tell me the truth. Who is he?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her expression shifting from fear to something colder. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice sharp. "You're jumping to conclusions again, like you always do." I shook my head. "Stop deflecting. This is real, Olivia. You've been sneaking someone into our house while I'm asleep." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're imagining things," she said, grabbing her bag. "I'm not doing this with you right now." And just like that, she walked out, leaving me standing there with the evidence still playing in my hands. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house, leaving a hollow silence in its wake. I stared at the spot where Olivia had stood just moments ago, her defiance still hanging in the air. My hands were shaking, my phone screen still displaying the damning recordings. She didn't even try to deny it. I dropped into the couch, my mind spiraling. Every excuse she'd given me, every time she called me paranoid, it was all a calculated lie. But what disturbed me most wasn't just the betrayal. It was the ease with which she walked away, as if she'd done this 100 times before. The next morning, Olivia was back, acting as though nothing had happened. She moved through the kitchen, humming softly as she poured coffee, her every move deliberate and controlled. "You were out late," I said, breaking the uneasy quiet. She glanced at me, her expression neutral. "I needed time to cool off." "You were being intense." I set my mug down, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "Intense? Is that what you call it when someone finds out their wife's been sneaking another man into their bedroom?" Her jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed her phone and started scrolling. "Who is he, Olivia?" I pressed. "At least give me the decency of a name." She sighed heavily, finally looking at me. "You're blowing this way out of proportion, Sam. There's no he. You're hearing things and jumping to conclusions." I almost laughed at how bold the lie was. "I have the recordings, Olivia. I heard you. Stop pretending this isn't real." Her eyes narrowed. "Maybe it's real to you because you're desperate for a reason to fight. Is that it? Are you bored?" I stood up, the anger bubbling over. "Enough!" I slammed my hand on the table, and for the first time, Olivia flinched. Her mask of composure cracked for a split second before she grabbed her bag and stormed out again. But this time, I didn't let her leave without a plan. Once she was gone, I started digging. Her behavior wasn't just suspicious, it was calculated. I knew she wasn't going to slip up and hand me the answers, so I needed to find them myself. I started with her phone records. She'd been careful, but not careful enough. Her call history showed a repeating number that wasn't saved under a name. I jotted it down and called it from my own phone, my heart pounding as it rang. On the third ring, a man's voice answered. "Hello." I froze, caught off guard by the casual tone. I didn't recognize it, but it was eerily familiar, like the one I'd heard on the recordings. I ended the call without saying a word, my chest tight. Later that night, I brought it up to Mark. We met at a small diner, his face lined with concern as I told him everything. "She's got someone else, man," he said flatly, stirring his coffee. "You don't need me to tell you that. It's more than that," I insisted. "She's not just cheating. She's hiding something." Mark frowned. "Like what?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "The number I called, the guy who answered, it's the same voice from the recordings." "I'm sure of it." Mark sat back, his expression serious. "You need to find out who he is. If Olivia's lying about this, what else could she be hiding?" That night, I set up a plan. Olivia's lies were unraveling, and I was done waiting for her to make the next move. I spent the next day tailing Olivia. It felt wrong, invasive even, but I was beyond second-guessing myself. She was lying about the recordings, the phone calls, everything. If I couldn't get the truth from her directly, I'd find it another way. She left the house around noon, claiming she had errands to run. I followed her at a distance, keeping my car just far enough behind hers to avoid suspicion. She drove to a coffee shop on the other side of town, one we'd never been to together. I parked across the street, ducking low in my seat as she got out of her car. At first, I thought she was just grabbing a latte. But then I saw him, the man from the bar. He walked up to her, casual and confident, wearing the same smug grin I'd noticed that night. Olivia smiled as she greeted him, her body language far too comfortable for my liking. They sat down at a corner table, speaking in hushed tones. Olivia leaned in close, her hand brushing his arm. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay put. Confronting them now would only give her another chance to spin the story, to gaslight me into thinking I was wrong. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures through the car window. They were grainy, but clear enough to show Olivia with another man. My stomach churned as I watched them laugh and talk like nothing was wrong, like they weren't ripping my life apart piece by piece. After about 45 minutes, they left together, heading toward his car. I followed them again, my pulse racing as they drove toward the outskirts of town. They stopped at a nondescript office building with tinted windows. I parked a block away and watched as they disappeared inside. What the hell is this? The building didn't look like anything special. No signs, no logos, just a generic gray facade. But the way they'd entered, glancing over their shoulders like they didn't want to be seen, set off alarm bells. I waited for almost an hour, but they didn't come back out. When I got home that night, Olivia was already there, acting as if nothing had happened. She was making dinner, humming to herself like she hadn't just spent the day with another man. "How were your errands?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay neutral. "Fine," she replied casually. "Nothing exciting." I clenched my fists under the table, the lies stacking higher and higher. Later that night, after she fell asleep, I pulled out the pictures I'd taken and stared at them, the anger bubbling up again. I didn't just want answers. I needed them. That office building wasn't just a random stop. Whatever they were doing there, it was important, and I was going to find out. The next morning, I couldn't shake the image of Olivia and the man disappearing into that office building. My gut told me that whatever they were doing in there wasn't innocent. I called Mark, filling him in on what I'd seen. "You're sure they went inside together?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "Yeah, I'm sure," I replied, pacing the living room. They were acting like they didn't want to be seen. That place has to mean something. Mark sighed. "So, what's your plan? Stalk her again?" "No," I said, glancing at the clock. "This time, I'm going inside." An hour later, I parked in front of the gray building. The lot was nearly empty, save for a few cars that looked as unremarkable as the building itself. I waited until someone walked out, an older man in a suit, and slipped in behind him before the door shut. The lobby was sterile, with plain white walls and a small reception desk. A woman in a headset sat behind it, barely glancing at me as I walked past. The elevator dinged, and I stepped inside, unsure of what floor to choose. The buttons weren't labeled with anything helpful, just numbers. I hit 3 on a whim, hoping it would lead me to something useful. The third floor was eerily quiet. The hallway stretched out before me, lined with doors that all looked the same. I walked cautiously, listening for any sound that might tell me where Olivia and the man had gone. That's when I saw it, a door slightly ajar at the end of the hall. Inside, the room was small, with a desk, filing cabinets, and a whiteboard covered in scribbles I didn't understand. But what caught my attention was the stack of folders on the desk. Curiosity overrode my better judgment. I rifled through them, my heart pounding as I scanned the pages. Client names, payment schedules, contracts, and then I saw it. Olivia's name, printed neatly on a document with the title Account Transfer Authorization. I froze. The document outlined a transfer from one of our joint accounts to an unlisted entity. The amount was staggering, enough to make me sick. What the hell was she doing? I pulled out my phone and snapped pictures of the document, along with anything else that looked suspicious. Just as I was about to leave, I heard voices in the hallway. My heart leapt into my throat. I stuffed the folders back into place and darted behind the desk, crouching low as the door creaked open. "He's starting to suspect," a man said, his voice low. Olivia's voice answered. "He doesn't have proof. As long as we stay ahead of him, he can't do anything." The man chuckled. "Good. Because we're too close to let him ruin this now." I clenched my fists, biting back the urge to confront them right then and there. Instead, I stayed hidden, listening as they shuffled through the room. After a few minutes, they left, their voices fading down the hallway. I waited until I was sure they were gone before slipping out and making my way back to the car. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind racing. Olivia wasn't just cheating, she was stealing from me. And the man? He wasn't just some fling. He was her partner in whatever scheme they were running. As I pulled into my driveway, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. Whatever they were planning, I had to stop it before it went any further. But I couldn't do it alone. Mark sat across from me in my living room, his face grim as I laid out everything. The stolen money, the suspicious office, and the conversation I'd overheard. "So, she's not just cheating," he said, running a hand through his hair. "She's ripping you off. And with this guy's help?" "Exactly," I said, pacing the room. "I don't know how long it's been going on or what they're planning, but if I don't stop it, they're going to drain me dry." Mark frowned. "You need to go to the police." I shook my head. "Not yet. I need more proof. If I go to them now, Olivia will twist the story. She's good at that." Mark leaned back, crossing his arms. "What's your next move, then?" I hesitated, glancing at my phone where the photos from the office were saved. I need to know where they're meeting next. That night, I kept an ear out for Olivia's usual excuses. Sure enough, just after dinner, she grabbed her bag and announced she was meeting a friend. "Which one?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She blinked, startled for a moment, before regaining her composure. "Lisa. You know Lisa." I nodded, pretending to buy it. "Have fun." The moment she left, I grabbed my keys and followed her again. This time, she drove to a small motel on the edge of town. I parked a safe distance away, watching as she met the man in the parking lot. They spoke briefly before heading inside together. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but the way they moved, hurried, cautious, set off every alarm bell in my head. I waited for them to disappear into one of the rooms before getting out of my car. The motel's front desk was manned by a bored-looking teenager scrolling through his phone. "Hey," I said, sliding a $20 bill across the counter. "Can you tell me which room Olivia Connolly just checked into?" He glanced at the money, then at me, his eyes narrowing. "Are you a cop or something?" "No," I said quickly. "Just family." He shrugged, pocketing the bill. "Room 112. Into the hall." My heart pounded as I approached the door to room 112. Voices drifted through the thin walls, too muffled to make out. I pulled out my phone and started recording, holding it close to the door. "Once it's transferred, he won't have anything left," Olivia was saying, her voice sharp but controlled. The man replied, but his words were too quiet to catch. "I told you he's suspicious," Olivia said. "We need to finish this now, before he gets in the way." My chest tightened as I backed away, my mind racing. This wasn't just a fling or a one-off betrayal. This was calculated, deliberate, and designed to ruin me. I didn't wait for them to come out. I drove straight to Mark's place, my hands shaking as I replayed the recording for him. "This is it," I said. "This is the proof I need." Mark stared at me, his expression dark. "Sam, this is bigger than you thought. She's not just stealing from you. She's planning to cut you out of everything." I nodded, my jaw tight. and I'm going to stop her. I sat at Mark's kitchen table, staring at my phone as the recording played for the third time. Each word from Olivia hit harder than the last. Once it's transferred, he won't have anything left. Mark paced the room, his expression grim. This isn't just an affair. This is premeditated. She's trying to ruin you, Sam. I know, I said, my voice cold. But I'm not going to let her. Mark leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. What's your move? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I'm going to take this to the police. I have the pictures, the documents from the office, and now this recording. It's enough to prove what she's doing. Mark nodded. Good, but you need to be careful. If she catches wind of this, she might try to destroy the evidence, or worse. The next morning, I walked into the police station with a folder in hand, my stomach churning. Detective Hall was sitting at his desk, sipping coffee and looking every bit as overworked as the first time I'd met him. Connolly, he said, raising an eyebrow as I approached. Didn't think I'd see you again so soon. I have something you need to see, I said, setting the folder on his desk. He opened it, flipping through the photos and documents. His expression shifted from casual curiosity to focused intensity as he listened to the recording I'd transferred to a USB drive. This is serious, Hall said, leaning back in his chair. Your wife isn't just cheating on you. She's committing fraud, and she's got someone helping her. Can you arrest her? I asked, the desperation creeping into my voice. Hall shook his head. Not yet. This is good evidence, but we need more to build a case. If we move too soon, her lawyer will tear this apart. What do you need? I asked, clenching my fists. We need a direct connection to the money, Hall said. A paper trail showing exactly where it's going and who's benefiting. I left the station feeling frustrated but determined. Olivia and her accomplice had been careful, but everyone made mistakes eventually. All I had to do was find theirs. That evening, I set up a hidden camera in our home office. Olivia rarely used the room, but on the rare occasion she did, it was always with her laptop open and her phone pressed to her ear. If she was moving money or communicating with her partner, it might happen there. The next few days were excruciating. Olivia's behavior didn't change. She was still cheerful, still pretending everything was normal. But now, every interaction felt like a performance, a mask she wore to keep me off her trail. Finally, on the third day, I caught a break. I checked the footage from the hidden camera late that night, scrolling through hours of nothing before stopping on a clip that made my heart race. Olivia was sitting at the desk, typing furiously on her laptop. Her phone was on speaker, and her voice was sharp. It's done, she said. The transfer will go through tomorrow. Make sure the account is ready. The man's voice replied, muffled, but clear enough to understand. Don't worry. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late. I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. She was one step away from taking everything, our savings, my future. But now, I had everything I needed to stop her. I sat at my kitchen table, watching the footage on a loop, each replay fueling the fire in my chest. Olivia's voice echoed in my ears. The transfer will go through tomorrow. Tomorrow. I had less than 24 hours to stop her from draining everything I'd worked for. I called Mark immediately, my hand trembling as I gripped the phone. I've got her, I said. She's making the transfer tomorrow. I caught it on camera. Mark's voice was sharp. Take it to Hall now. Don't wait. I didn't need to be told twice. By the time I arrived at the station, it was late, and the fluorescent lights made the place feel even more sterile than usual. Hall met me in his office, rubbing his eyes as I handed over the new footage. This is it, I said, pacing as he plugged in the USB. This proves she's behind the transfers. It has her voice, her timing, everything. Hall watched the clip in silence, his expression unreadable. When it ended, he nodded slowly. This is good, he said. Very good. So what now? I asked, stopping in front of his desk. Can you stop the transfer? We'll freeze the accounts first thing in the morning, Hall replied. But that's not enough. We need her to confirm her involvement. Ideally, on record. My stomach sank. You want me to confront her? Hall shook his head. Not directly. But if we set up a sting, we might catch her red-handed. The plan was simple, but risky. I'd let Olivia think she'd won, acting as if I suspected nothing. Meanwhile, Hall and his team would monitor the accounts and prepare to intercept the transfer. If she made contact with her accomplice during the process, they'd record everything. It was a gamble, but it was the only chance we had. That night, I walked into the house with a forced smile, trying to act natural. Olivia was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while stirring a pot of something on the stove. "Hey," I said, setting my keys on the counter. She glanced up, her expression neutral. "You're home late. Work ran over." I lied, grabbing a glass of water to keep my hands busy. "What about you? Busy day?" "Not really," she replied with a shrug. "Same old stuff." I nodded, forcing myself to keep the conversation light. But inside, I was screaming. Later that night, I watched her from the corner of my eye as she typed on her laptop in the living room. Her focus was intense, her lips pressed into a thin line. I knew she was preparing for the transfer. Tomorrow, everything would come to light. The morning arrived too quickly, and the air in the house felt heavy with unspoken tension. Olivia moved around the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone like it was any other day. But it wasn't. I pretended to scroll through emails at the dining table, my phone buzzing in my pocket with text from Detective Hall. "Hall, we're in position. Stay close, but don't tip her off." "Me? She's making the transfer soon. Be ready." I glanced at Olivia, who was now seated at the counter with her laptop open. Her fingers flew over the keys, her brows furrowed in concentration. "Big plans for today?" I asked casually. "Not really," she replied, barely glancing up. "Just catching up on some things." I forced a smile, fighting the urge to confront her right then and there. After breakfast, Olivia disappeared into the home office, closing the door behind her. My pulse quickened as I watched the clock, each second feeling like an eternity. Hall's next text came through. "Hall, we see movement on the account. She's starting the transfer." I stood outside the office, listening closely. Through the door, I could hear her voice, low and steady, speaking to someone on speakerphone. "Just like we planned," she said. "It'll be done in a few minutes." I stayed frozen, barely breathing as I listened. The man on the other end was calm and confident. "Good," he said. "Once it clears, we're set. Make sure he doesn't catch on until it's too late." Olivia laughed softly. "Don't worry. He's clueless." The words hit like a punch to the gut, but I couldn't let the anger distract me. Hall's team was closing in. The next text came moments later. "Hall, account's frozen. She'll know soon. Stay back." Inside the office, Olivia's tone shifted. "What do you mean, error?" she snapped. "The transfer was fine a second ago." There was a pause. Then the man's voice grew sharper. "Check it again. If he blocked it." Olivia cut him off, her voice rising. "No, that's impossible. He doesn't even know." She stopped abruptly, and I heard the sound of her chair scraping against the floor. The door flew open, and Olivia stood there, her face pale and furious. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice shaking. I stared at her, forcing myself to stay calm. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Sam," she shouted, stepping closer. "The transfer isn't going through. Did you mess with the accounts?" I crossed my arms. "Maybe. Or maybe you underestimated me." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw fear behind the anger. "You had no right," she hissed. "You had no right," I shot back, my voice cold. "To steal from me. To lie to me. To treat me like a fool while you plotted behind my back." Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. I didn't have to look to know it was Hall and his team. Olivia's face crumpled as realization dawned. "No," she whispered, backing away. "You didn't." "Oh, I did," I said, stepping aside as Hall entered, flanked by 2 officers. "Olivia Connolly?" Hall said, his tone formal. "You're under arrest for attempted fraud and conspiracy to commit theft." She stared at me, betrayal etched across her face. "How could you do this?" she spat as the officers cuffed her wrists. I met her glare, the weight of everything finally lifting. "Because you left me no choice." As the officers led her away, I slumped into the nearest chair, exhaustion and relief washing over me. Hall stayed behind for a moment, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing, Sam. This is on her, not you." I nodded, though the truth still felt heavy. This wasn't just about the money or the betrayal. It was about the life I thought we'd built, and how easily it had been torn apart. The house was eerily quiet after Hall, and the officers left with Olivia in custody. I sat in the living room, staring at the coffee table where her laptop and phone still sat, abandoned. For years, this house had been a sanctuary, a place where I felt safe. Now, it felt like a stranger's home. Mark showed up not long after, his expression a mix of relief and concern. "You okay?" he asked, sitting across from me. I shrugged, my voice hollow. "I don't know. I should feel better, right? She's gone. It's over." Mark frowned. "It's not over, Sam. Not yet." I looked up at him, confused. "There's still the guy she was working with," Mark continued. "The one on the phone. Hall might have her in custody, but if this guy gets away, there's no telling what he'll try to do next." My chest tightened. He was right. Olivia wasn't working alone. Her accomplice had been pulling the strings just as much as she had. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Hall said they're going to track him down. But what if they don't? What if he disappears?" Mark's voice was firm. "Then you make sure he doesn't." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house made me jump, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if Olivia's partner came after me? What if he wanted revenge? I grabbed Olivia's laptop, hoping to find something. An email, a message, anything that might lead me to him. Her passwords were easy to guess. She'd always been predictable that way. Sure enough, her inbox was full of correspondence with someone signed only as A. The messages were cryptic but damning. Discussions about the accounts, the transfers, and veiled mentions of removing obstacles. I forwarded everything to Hall, my heart pounding as I read the last email. "We're too close to fail now. If he catches on, handle it." Handle it? The implications made my stomach churn. The next day, Hall called. "We've identified Olivia's partner," he said. "Alan Marks. He's been linked to several fraud cases in other states, but he's slippery. We're working on a warrant, but he's already on the move." "What does that mean?" I asked, my throat tight. "It means we need to move fast," Hall replied. "If you see or hear anything suspicious, call us immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself." I nodded, though his words did little to calm my nerves. That afternoon, as I sat in the living room, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "You should have stayed out of it." My blood ran cold. The game wasn't over yet. The message stared back at me from my phone screen. "You should have stayed out of it." My heart pounded as I read it over and over, the weight of the words pressing down on me. I looked around the house, every shadow and quiet creak suddenly feeling menacing. Whoever this it was, he knew I'd exposed them. And now he was coming for me. I forwarded the text to Hall immediately, adding a note. "I think Alan Marks knows where I am." His response came within minutes. "Stay inside. We're sending a patrol car to keep an eye on your house." I tried to take comfort in that, but the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. This wasn't just about money or betrayal anymore. It was personal. That night, I double-checked every lock on the doors and windows, my paranoia in overdrive. Mark called to check in, his voice tense. Hall told me about the message, he said. "What's your plan?" "I don't have one," I admitted. "I'm waiting for the cops to make a move." Mark hesitated. "Sam, you can't just wait. If this guy's as dangerous as he sounds, you need to be ready for anything." I spent the next few hours preparing. I didn't have much, just a baseball bat tucked behind the couch and a flashlight I kept by the front door. It wasn't much comfort, but it was something. Around midnight, the silence outside was shattered by the sound of a car pulling up. I peeked out the window, expecting to see the patrol car Hall had promised. It wasn't. A dark sedan idled at the curb, its headlights off. My phone buzzed with another text. "Come outside. Let's talk." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The message was from the same number as before. "He's here." I texted Hall quickly. "He's outside my house. Dork sedan. Please hurry." Then I waited, my pulse pounding in my ears. Minutes felt like hours as I crouched by the window, watching the car. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, his face hidden in the shadows. He stood there for a moment, scanning the house like he knew I was watching. He took a step toward the front door. Then another. My phone buzzed again. "If you make this harder than it has to be, you'll regret it." I gripped the baseball bat tighter, every instinct screaming at me to run. But where would I go? The sound of sirens in the distance was the only thing that stopped him. He froze, glancing toward the street as the blue and red lights grew closer. The man turned on his heel, disappearing back into the car. Within seconds, the sedan sped off into the night, leaving a trail of tire marks on the asphalt. When the patrol car arrived, I was standing on the porch, shaking and clutching the bat. The officer stepped out, his hand resting on his holster. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded numbly. He was here. He left when he heard the sirens. The officer's radio crackled as he called it in, his expression serious. "We'll find him," he assured me. But as I watched the dark street, I couldn't shake the feeling that Alan Marks wasn't done with me yet. The next morning, I was running on fumes. I hadn't slept, every creak of the house, sending me to the window to check for shadows that weren't there. The patrol car stayed parked outside, but it didn't feel like enough. Detective Hall called just after 9 a.m. "We've tracked Alan Marks to a motel on the outskirts of town," he said. "He hasn't left since last night." My grip on the phone tightened. "So, what now? You arrest him?" "We're working on it," Hall replied. "We need to coordinate with the district attorney to make sure the charges stick. But Sam, you need to stay on alert. If he contacts you again, let me know immediately." I hung up, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. They were closing in on Marks, but until they made their move, I was still a target. I spent the day trying to distract myself, but my nerves were shot. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed with another text from the same unknown number. "We need to finish this. Tonight. No more waiting." My stomach churned. I forwarded the message to Hall. His response, almost instant. "Do not engage. We're moving on him soon." I stared at the text, my heart pounding. Marks was pushing, and I knew he wouldn't stop until one of us came out on top. That evening, as the sun set, I heard it, a faint knock at the back door. I froze, my pulse spiking as I grabbed the baseball bat from behind the couch. The patrol car was still out front, but the officer hadn't seen or heard anything. The knock came again, louder this time. Taking a deep breath, I crept toward the back of the house, my footsteps silent on the carpet. I peered through the curtains, my heart leaping into my throat. Alan Marks stood on the back porch, his face calm, but his eyes cold. He raised his hand and knocked again, his movements slow and deliberate. "Sam," he called out, his voice smooth. "We need to talk." I clenched the bat tighter, my knuckles white. "You should leave," I shouted back through the door. "The police are already on their way." Marks chuckled softly. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to explain a few things. You're in over your head, and I think you know it." I didn't respond, my mind racing. Every instinct told me to stay put, to wait for Hall and his team to handle it. But part of me wanted answers, wanted to know why this man had destroyed my life. "I'll make this easy for you," Marks continued. "Open the door, and we can talk. Or don't, and I'll make sure you regret it." I glanced at the patrol car outside, its lights dimmed. Where the hell were they? Before I could decide, the sound of tires screeching outside made Marks turn. Flashing lights lit up the street as two police cars skidded to a stop. "Get on the ground!" Hall's voice boomed as officers swarmed the yard. Marks hesitated for a fraction of a second, his calm demeanor slipping as he realized he was out of options. He raised his hand slowly, his gaze flicking back to the door where I stood watching. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. The officers tackled him to the ground, cuffing his wrists as Hall approached. I stepped outside, my knees weak as I watched them haul Marks to his feet. "Good work, Sam," Hall said, nodding to me. "We got him now." Marks smirked, even as they led him to the car. "Enjoy your victory," he called over his shoulder. "You'll see soon enough. It doesn't mean a thing." As the cars drove away, I stood in the driveway, the adrenaline draining from my body. Rebecca pulled up minutes later, rushing to my side with a look of relief. "Is it over?" she asked, gripping my arm. I nodded, though Marks's final words still lingered in my mind. "For now," I said. In the days that followed, the fallout was messy. Olivia was charged with multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy, and Marks faced a slew of charges that would likely keep him behind bars for years. But the scars they left behind wouldn't heal overnight. The betrayal, the lies, the feeling of being a stranger in my own life. It would take time to rebuild. One thing was certain, though. I wasn't the same man I'd been before. I'd trusted blindly, ignored the warning signs, and paid the price. But now I knew better. What would you do if the person you trusted most turned your life upside down? Could you forgive, or would you fight back? Share your thoughts in the comments.